This is a situation you and your industry peers may find yourselves in. Let's dive in and learn more about how to better prepare your organization for the unknown.
Hey everyone, Sharon Stevens here with Dell Technologies, representing our professional services division for our cybersecurity practice. And welcome to this session. We're going to talk about how to combat modern day threats using proactive measures and reactive actions. I'll also be joined a little bit later in this session by my virtual cyber partner in crime, Mr. Joey Snow from Microsoft. But with that, let's go ahead and jump right into it and talk about what's going on in the world. So this past year, it's been really hard for a lot of organizations, right? The previous year wasn't much better. Phishing attacks up 600% since the onset of the pandemic. Ransomware attacks have skyrocketed over 900% since comparing this past summer to the previous year. We're also seeing a shift in threat actors' techniques and tactics. And by that, I mean, traditionally, threat actors will target our IT environments. But we're seeing a shift as now they're focusing on OT. So our operational technology environments. And a good example of that is this past year, we had the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, and the ransomware actually impacted their operational technology environment. And so with that was this domino effect, right? Supply chain impacts. And for those of you on the East Coast, you really saw that as you went to the gas pumps, right? And if all of that isn't enough, let's not forget, we have a global shortage of trained and experienced cybersecurity professionals. So it's no wonder that a lot of organizations aren't really confident on their ability to recover from an attack. And then if we think about common threat tactics, the start of a cyber attack usually occurs with some sort of reconnaissance. So maybe it's a phishing attack, hoping that someone will click on a link or open a file that downloads some sort of malware. Or maybe it's exploiting a known vulnerability within the environment. Some proactive measures you can do is monitoring, active monitoring. That can be your first line of defense, and see those indicators of potential compromise before there's some sort of data breach. Another way, I always like to ask my customers or really share with them, in this state and day and age, we really have to assume breach. So let's talk about your backup strategy. Do you have one? Are you using any sort of offline storage system? Does your storage system use artificial intelligence, machine learning? Today, we're seeing a lot of our storage devices that are more traditional. They don't have any sort of sensor that's checking the data as it's being copied over to see if something's changed or maybe potentially some sort of malware. So that is a real gap and an area that we really need to think about, what we're using for our offline backup solutions. And then as we begin our journey to a more secure cyber landscape, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind and consider to have a mature program and process, such as securing identities and using some sort of access management system, along with kind of transitioning to a role-based access control methodology. Securing devices, all of the devices, not just a fraction of the devices in the network. And then let's not forget about hardening our cloud environment. That's protecting a lot of our critical business operations. We're putting a ton of data, devices in the cloud, and we really need to harden that as securely as we do our on-prem systems. And then last, let's not forget, protect those mission critical data and applications that drives your day-to-day business operations. So that was a lot. And you're probably asking, how do I prioritize all of that? So I would say to start, get a good understanding, what you have both from a proactive as well as a reactive position, and determine, what's currently in place and maybe identifying some gaps. And as an example, I would say doing some sort of security assessment is a great way to identify, not only from a technology standpoint, but also from a process standpoint, what's going well and where there might need to be some improvements. And if you ask me personally, I'd recommend doing a security assessment at least once a year and treat it like a health check, kind of like you're doing your physicals, right? There's a lot of things that can change, transition over a year, new technologies, peoples, sometimes departments reorganize. And so what you think might be in place may not be an accurate depiction. So, here's how it all comes together. And it's part of the NIST framework that Dell has actually aligned our security practice against. And when you look across the pillars of that, this is really a good representation of what a mature defense and depth approach looks like. And speaking of NIST framework, I know another organization that has aligned their security practice to the NIST framework. Hey, Joe, are you out there?
Hey, Sharon. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Hey, Joey, would you mind introducing yourself to the folks?
Sure. My name's Joey Snow. I'm a principal program manager in the Identity and Network Access Engineering team here at Microsoft.
So, Joey, let's talk a little bit about how we've been working together this past year. I don't know about you, but what continues to keep me up at night is ransomware. We have helped a ton of customers, unfortunately, this past year recover from cyber attacks. And I don't know about you, but I feel like there's still this confusion on signature antivirus versus signature-less next generation endpoint detection and response solutions. Kind of, what are your thoughts about that?
So I think it goes beyond just the endpoint as well here. I think there's a need to move to more modern pieces across all of the things in the NIST framework, whether it be the endpoint, the identity, the network pieces, modernizing those applications so that they're not using legacy protocols for authentication. And it's about taking those modern approaches and the things that these modern approaches can bring to the security landscape. So, for example, we gather so many signals running our cloud services at Microsoft that we do a pretty good job of understanding, hey, look, this is a real signal that may identify a vector for an attack versus, hey, look, this is something that, may be benign, right? And it's, you mentioned earlier, it's like going through and reviewing all those log files. Wouldn't it be great if all those log files really were condensed down and the amount of signal to noise, the signal is a lot higher than that noise. It's really about kind of adopting those modern tools so that you can kind of get out of the business of having to respond to every little alert that pops up.
Yeah, that's a great point. And speaking of indicators and signals, this past year we also had the Microsoft Exchange exploit, and Microsoft released the script so you can run it against your environment and see if there's any indicators of compromise, right? And so we had a lot of Dell customers reach out to us, and we used the Microsoft script to assess if there was some sort of concern. Fortunately, a lot of our customers had patched the vulnerability, so there was no indicator of compromise. Now, some hadn't patched it yet, but luckily, no indicators of compromise. But we did have one, unfortunately, didn't patch the system. While we were doing the assessment, we actually found a threat actor. So at that point, we swiveled and we went directly into incident response mode and eradicated the threat actor. We patched up the system, and then we took a step back and looked left and right to see, are there any other open doors, gaps that maybe that threat actor could, re-penetrate that network. So we made sure that customer was in a good position.
You know, Sharon, I think it's super important for folks to understand that when we have a great partnership like Microsoft has with Dell, that we communicate with you, we give you those tools like you mentioned in the exchange, dealing with the exchange incidents, and making sure that you have the knowledge and expertise to take the products that we build, like I build inside of the engineering team for identity, and you can take those to customers. But what I think is so super cool is like you talked about, there's two motions of this. There's the proactive piece, like what can I do to prevent? But then the other piece is, if things happen, and we talk about, you always assume breach. I think it's kind of, and a lot of times more when, how do you limit the scope of that, and then how do you recover? And I think that's that expertise that exists there, that, hey, look, do everything you can to protect yourself, but if something were to really go wrong, here's the expertise that we have, and here's the knowledge that we have. And it also is investing in those tools, right? Investing in, modernizing the identity. So if things were to happen, you're notified as soon as possible, and you can mitigate the damage. And some of that mitigation can actually be automated and really run kind of at that user level. 99% of a lot of the cyber attacks that we see can be prevented by using something as simple as multi-factor authentication. So now we've taken that responsibility of the all up cybersecurity health of an organization, and we've moved that beyond just the folks who are responsible for cybersecurity, moved it past just the folks that are responsible for IT operations, and moved it into the hands of everybody. Right. So when a normal user sees a prompt, they're like, I'm not trying to log into that tool right now, and they can deny that prompt. That's kind of that level of protection.
Yeah, and that's that holistic defense and depth approach that I love seeing, because we need everybody to do their part. But, I feel like the cyber attacks, as they continue to increase, no one's immune. Small, medium, large, independent of industry, everybody's a target. And, we've seen even our school districts hit really hard this year. Like, they don't have enough challenges of their own with, the remote learning and such. And I read something earlier this week where there's a new policy or law that was just passed, helping our K-12 customers. It's called the K-12 Cybersecurity Act. And that's supposed to provide funding and support to beef up these defenses for that particular industry. And last week, unfortunately, one of my K-12 customers called us on a Monday. They had been hit by the ransomware attack. And so they reached out to Dell to see how we could help. We got on the phone with them. We started our instant response that day. We put the plan together, the strategy. I deployed my engineers. They showed up at the door the next morning, shoulder to shoulder with the customer, so they know we're in this with them, and we're in the middle of a very successful recovery on top of eradicating the threat actor for that particular customer.
I think it's really important, and I want to just hammer home, it doesn't matter the size of your organization, because your organization may be working with another larger organization, or your organization may just be a target because it ended up in some list somewhere out in the dark webs. The cybersecurity, it used to be, kind of this thing that only the biggest had to worry about. And with this new shift, with the post-COVID space where we're all working from home, we're all doing a lot more remotely, it's super important that everybody kind of starts to take at least some aspect of this and bringing it home. And this is where, again, when you start looking at the services that Dell has to offer on top of the products that Microsoft has to offer in the security space, we're really looking to try to make this a lot easier and kind of built in, where it's not like, oh, look, we have to go rebuild all of this, outdated stuff that we've got out there. We're really, we can start bringing in some of these learnings, the data, the knowledge, the bad passwords that are out there from the cloud back to on-premises. That's just super important. And it matters for every organization, no matter where the size is. And you should really start looking at where are the places that I can start impacting now. And we talked about that NIST framework. It starts really, I'm biased. I work in the identity team. So obviously it does start with that identity, because identity does spread throughout the other layers of the NIST framework. But it's really like, where is somewhere that I can start, and where can I start making impact today?
Agree. that particular customer that was hit last week, they were actually trying to get after their cybersecurity strategy, and they had deployed, a leading edge, next generation endpoint detection response solution. But here's where they failed. They deployed it just natively out of the box. So you know what that looks like out of the box. Policies in passive mode, not tuning towards their environment. And then they made a second critical mistake, and that was not looking at the dashboard. There was nobody looking at the dashboard. So, you can spend all this money on all these tools, but if you're not tuning, deploying it correctly, if nobody's looking at the dashboard, it's really limited in value. Would you agree to that?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You've got to have, again, the point I made earlier, it's about, when you've got signal and there's not a lot of noise and you've tuned that down so that when you get signal, it's probably something you should be looking at. You need to make sure somebody's looking at those dashboards, 100%.
Yeah, it's super critical. And then you touched on identity, and as we look kind of forward, zero trust seems to be a new buzzword. Everybody wants to align the framework to it. I actually like it too. I'm a big component of least privilege. And yep. I wish there was that easy button that you could just press and boom, it happens. But it's, it's a shift of the mind and a methodology change and shift. So it takes time to adopt and kind of grow in that space. Do you have any other things that you're kind of seeing on the forefront?
Yeah. So listen, that role-based access management is going to be super critical moving forward. And it used to be, back in the day, you had to have plans upon plans upon plans upon plans to really kind of start moving that direction. I think what's important to note is as you start moving to, a cloud-based identity provider like Azure Active Directory, we do provide that role segmentation in most cases for your admins, 100%. Listen, admins out there, you shouldn't be running as global admin. Right? That absolutely not.
Yeah.
You should have multi-factor authentication, and then you should have a process or a methodology to where you can elevate on demand to those roles where necessary, where it's audited, where it's protected, where after say an hour, that work that I was doing that I needed to be an admin for is then completed, and I am automatically reduced down where I don't have to do that kind of manual thing and make sure that I'm not running at that higher elevation level. That's super critical. And automation. There's a lot of automation that you can do where users can request that elevation in and of themselves or reset their passwords by themselves that doesn't require IT intervention. So that's really kind of that future that we've got in terms of being able to adopt that role-based access control a lot faster than we used to be able to in the past.
Yeah, I for sure. I love working smarter and not harder. So yeah,
you got it.
Automation. Hey, Joey, it's been great. Thanks for joining me in this session. So folks, planning and assessing your current security state is super important. If you need help with any of that, or maybe you need help with the day-to-day operations to protect your data and devices, know that Dell Technologies has over 20 years of business resiliency and expertise to help you accelerate your security initiatives and become more resilient. Thanks for your time today. I've got some links, and the slides will be in the resource page for you to learn more about. If you'd like to reach out to us, feel free to reach out to us at either Microsoft Security Services at Dell.com. Again, that's Microsoft Security Services at Dell.com. And if you have any sort of incident or suspicious activity and you'd like us to take a closer look, or you just need help, feel free to email us at incident.recovery@Dell.com. Again, that's incident.recovery@Dell.com. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and remember, if you're cyber strong, then you can't go wrong. Be vigilant, my friends.